You cannot get time back. The only thing you can do is decide how you're going to use your time and evaluate if what you're using your time on is actually propelling your business forward.
You're listening to Home Care Hindsight, the podcast where we talk with home care leaders about the big mistakes they've made and the even bigger lessons they've learned along the way. My name's David Knack, Director of Sales and Partnerships with Ava, and I've built a career on the idea that we learn a whole lot more from our mistakes than from our successes, which is great because I've made a lot of mistakes. I've gotten to know some of the leaders in this industry who have impressive resumes and have earned a lot of respect. So I thought it would be fun, instead of asking them about the great things they've accomplished, to have them tell the story of one of their biggest mistakes they've made and how that mistake changed their thinking and the way they run their business. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Home Care Hindsight. Today, I have joining me Sarah Barker, who is owner of Senior Care Sales Solutions. Sarah, thanks so much for joining the show.
Thank you so much, David. I am really excited for this opportunity.
I am really excited to have you on the show. I've been following you on LinkedIn for a while, and I guess you did like your first couple of in-person events for the Senior Care Sales Solutions group this year. Is that right?
I actually started launching them in 2022, and in 2022, I did a few. It was towards the end of the year. In 2023, my intention was to do 4 of them, and I ended up doing 13 of them. And so very blessed that people continue to be interested in them. And I was only planning on doing them in San Diego and Nashville, but I've done them in lots of various locations across the United States now.
I love it. I mean, that's how you know you've tapped into something that the industry would like, is that people keep saying, hey, can you come and do more of those, please? So that's great. Congratulations. For people who aren't familiar with you and the work that you do and all that kind of stuff, how would you introduce yourself?
My name is Sarah, and I'm on a mission to redefine the way that senior care professionals serve referral partners and families. And that comes from redefining the way that a home care marketer views themselves and views the work that they're doing, because it needs to be a job of, of service, right? Not transactional. And then on the other side of things, because I still do help families, I have my business Connect Our Elders. And if you were to ask me what the why is behind that, it's very simple. We have a responsibility to take care of our nation's elders because they laid the foundation for the lives that we live today.
Well, that's great. I think one of the things that's really interesting to me and stands out is like, part of why I think you're probably good at what you do is you are very much a connector. We had one conversation and you were like, hey, here's all these people that I can introduce you to. And I'm new to the industry. I've been working in this space since December of last year. And so that's something that not everybody does and seems to be very much like a part of, kind of how you approach business and relationships and those sorts of things.
100%. And I think part of it is my natural nature to be a connector. But I was also very much trained to be a connector. So one of the best sales trainers I ever had, her name is Ashley Maroney, and she oversees sales for all of the key, right? Yeah. And she trained me, and she also trained Gabrielle Pumpian. And that is one of the core principles, is that if you really want to expedite your success in this industry, as far as developing referral source relationships and nurturing those relationships, be that maven, be that connector of people.
Yeah, very much a give before you ask kind of approach, which, I think is awesome. Well, as we've discussed, and as listeners probably already know and are sick of hearing about, I get tired of small talk kind of fast. And what I always want to be able to do is just ask the question, what kind of person are you? And you're not allowed to do that in polite company and out there in the world. And people look at you funny if you do. I've learned that from personal experience. But when you're on a podcast and you host the podcast, people who come on just kind of go with the flow. And so in order to ask the question, what kind of person are you? I'm going to ask, what's something that you could start a podcast about?
I would start a podcast about childhood trauma and how it impacts the formation of the brain. I did not have the easiest upbringing, and there is such a thing called generational trauma. And I do think that you can grow past it with a lot of, assistance. But for me, it's been a lot of self-reflection, a lot of reading, and a lot of surrounding myself with people and having conversations around the topic. It's very interesting to me too, because as I'm working with marketers from home care agencies across the country, I can see, before maybe they even mention anything to me about their upbringing, I can see how it's playing out in their marketing efforts, because it affects, that early childhood trauma will affect the way that we feel about ourselves and the way that we show up in interactions. And I've had marketers where we had to overcome that. Not that I'm a therapist, right? Maybe just by experience in my own self-study. But oftentimes, once we can get past that blockage from early childhood trauma, now we're smooth sailing and having really effective interactions with our referral partners.
What's the thing everybody should know about childhood trauma that they don't?
Think of it this way. Experiences that you've had as your brain is forming growing up, even if you move on in life and you end up having a very successful life, a very good relationships, great jobs, great friends, all of that, the stories that get embedded in us early on from that childhood trauma are the same stories that we continue to carry with us. And so it's those stories that are, think of them like filters, or, these projections that we put over every situation. So if one of the impacts of the childhood trauma is, I'm not good enough, right? However that came about in the brain because of the interactions with parents, because children, even if they're being fine to the child, but if there's the negativity, the abuse between the parents, the child doesn't know how to process that stuff. So they internalize it, and the default is something is wrong with me. I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. But if we never work through those issues, it doesn't matter if you're 20 or if you're 50 years old. If you don't address that, that is what you're projecting onto your conversations with referral sources. So if you're going to go to the skilled nursing facility, and it's inevitably going to happen, it happens all the time, you get rejected. Well, versus understanding that this is part of the job, the marketer who perhaps hasn't, is struggling with those internal issues is going to personalize that, become demoralized, and it's more difficult for them to go back and have that tenacity and that frequency that we have to get to advance the relationship.
A friend of mine that I've known for a long time now is the head of our United Way, which does a lot to address poverty and all other sorts of challenges, education, childcare, et cetera, in our community. And one of the things that he talks about that I think is really well put is if you see somebody driving crazy on the highway and swerving to avoid every pothole and being really erratic, the question is, why would somebody drive like that? I don't. I have a Subaru Outback with symmetrical all-wheel drive that they sell like crazy to millennials like myself. I'm going to take on those potholes just, as aggressively as possible. Maybe not. I might move a little. But if somebody is, their shocks are, 10,000 miles past when they need to be replaced, you can tell I know nothing about cars, and they don't have enough money to buy a new set of tires if they blow one out, then that changes the way that you drive. And I think a lot of times when people have experienced trauma, when there are difficult either like cultural or economic issues that are in play, people can behave from our perspective erratically. And I think, one of the things that I take from what you're saying is like understanding the why behind people's behavior. And this extends to how people perform in sales, how caregivers are acting, how the people that we're trying to sell to or recruit or whatever are acting. All of that's informed by their past and the baggage that they have. And, lots of us go through life without doing anything about it.
It is, right? It's human behavior. And it all goes back to how the brain was formed. And we can change, but we have to rewire it, like almost reprogram it. And you're mentioning erratic behavior. But sometimes how this behavior can show up is not necessarily an erratic or aggressive type behavior. It can actually show up in this behavior where, for whatever position they're in, maybe they're too meek and mild.
Sure.
Or because of these insecurities relating back to this trauma, the insecurities cause them to feel like, I have to people please so much, right, to get that acceptance. And one of the best things to learn as a home care marketer is there's a lot of fish in the sea. Not everybody has to be your cup of tea. And the quicker that you can learn that you're not going to be everybody's cup of tea, you're not going to spend a lot of time banging your head against the wall. Now, let me clarify. I am not saying that you will not continue to focus on a high value target account, right? We've qualified it. But if that person is super rude to you and they're not giving you the time of day and we've put in enough effort and, we've looked at all these factors, I don't want my marketers to remain in a demoralizing position because it's triggering them actually on a deeper level. Yeah. And we need to replace that account with somebody else who's going to be accepting.
I think, I'm in sales. I've been in sales for the majority of my career. And I opened a property and casualty insurance agency June 1st of 2020. I don't know if you remember that. That was not a good time for, you probably were not talking to any insurance salespeople about whether or not you should switch auto insurance providers. So as you can imagine, I'm a failed business owner. It's part of kind of my journey. And part of why I love working with business owners so much is I know if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. But I remember I was cold calling dental agencies. I decided and I got some advice that maybe our product would be good for those kinds of businesses. And I remember talking to this really angry office manager. And, I'm just trying to be real cheerful and build a little rapport. I was not great at cold calling back then. We can talk about cold calling sometime. I'm passionate about cold calling. It rocks. It's the best. Nobody's good at it. And if you're good at it, it's amazing. Anyways, so I was terrible at cold calling at this time. And, he decided that I was an easy target as a outlet for his aggression. And he starts just berating me. And I was starting to get really offended and hurt. And then at the very end, and he's just building up this whole time. And he says, and you know what? And he's screaming at me. He goes, we're not interested. And he slams down the phone as hard as he could. And I was like, that's it? Not interested? It was the worst sales call I've had in my entire career. And the guy was just his big finale that he thought was going to get me was not interested. And for whatever reason, that just was he sat on a whoopee cushion at the end of the call. And I was like, oh, I could do this. It was so funny. But to your point, we don't need to work with assholes. It's pretty easy to not work with assholes. And
exactly.
That's what we're gonna do.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I would have told you in that moment is thank him for being so transparent. So now you know not to call that one back. And we're just simply going to take him off the list and replace him with 3 more.
I love it. You didn't think you were going to get deep dive of childhood trauma when you tuned into this podcast today. You're not going to get this on any other home care podcasts that were launched in September of 2024. So Sarah, I love that. Let's talk next. I know you have accomplished a lot of things. People trust you for advice on how to market, how to sell, how to work with referral sources, all kinds of other things. We'll talk about some of that later. But we're not here to talk about any of the things you do well. We're here to talk about the big mistake that you made. And so, Sarah, what's your big mistake?
Thank you for asking this question. And I know when we originally talked, I was going to share a different mistake than what I'm going to share now. But then it dawned on me this morning that the big mistake I'm about to share is one that I'm still processing and working on forgiving myself, right? Which is when you are a home care marketer, where you're the owner and you are the marketer. I see it all the time still. And this is what I did in the beginning. I felt like I had to attend every single networking event that existed, right? In order to be successful. And so for years, rather than picking up my daughter, right, when she was younger at 5 p.m., right, typical end of the workday, it would be 7 p.m., 7:30 p.m. because I would be attending this networking event. And then by the time you fight traffic and you get there and then you get home, how much time do you actually have to spend together? Now, my daughter is now 15. She thinks she's 20. She's a very, very good child, exerting her independence for sure. But, lost time is never found again. And Benjamin Franklin says this, and it's true. You cannot get time back. The only thing you can do is decide how you're going to use your time and evaluate if what you're using your time on is actually propelling your business forward, right? Which does tie into your ability to take care of your children, right? Or your significant other, whatever your dynamic is. But I very much look back on my life and recognize I spent a lot of time in networking events where it was pointless. And I could have had that time with my daughter that I'm not going to get back. And so the way that you do this is maybe you are just starting out. Sure, go to all the networking events, but do your after action review, your AAR, and determine, was that valuable? How many people were there? What types of people were there? What were their roles? What level were they at? How many people did I actually end up scheduling one-to-ones with after this networking event, right? They were serious when they said they wanted to meet. And then tighten your shot group. Decide which ones are truly worth your time that are going to advance your business initiatives. So that way you do have more time to not miss out with your family.
Yeah. This is so poignant for me. As you know, I've got a 3-month-old daughter. Her name's Joni. Her favorite song right now is American Pie. I've also introduced her to Bohemian Rhapsody and Scenes from an Italian Restaurant by Billy Joel, which my conspiracy theory is that those are the same song, but just in slightly different genres. But we don't have time to get into that right now. But I remember shortly after my wife and I found out that we were expecting, we went to all the parks in Utah, which was intended to be a not first trimester trip, but ended up being a first trimester trip. And so I felt badly. I did a lot of cool hikes, and my wife would like sit at the, she's a crocheter, she'd sit at the gift shop and do her thing. And we bought this onesie. And we thought it was the biggest onesie we'd ever seen. It was the smallest one they had in the park. And it was like, it's 3 to 6 months. And already, baby girl, she's eating good. She's nice and healthy. She's got these big chunky thighs. But she's already like, we had to put it away. We're done with it. She's outgrown it. And just seeing like how quickly time goes by for me, I'm acutely aware of it now. But I know I'm going to blink and she's going to be 5. She's going to be 8, whatever.
David, it's true. And everybody tells new parents, enjoy every second. It goes by fast, but it's one of those things until you experience it yourself.
Yeah.
You don't have the perspective.
Yep.
And it does enjoy every second, right? And here's another way to big epiphany I had when it relates to time. So I'm 42 now, but this was a couple years ago. I was driving down the highway in San Diego, and it was the day before I was about to turn 40. And I was driving 5 north, about to get on 52 east. And I thought, wow, I'm turning 40 tomorrow. The next thought was, that went by really fast. And then my next thought was, I can only survive the next 40 is going to go even faster, because doesn't it seem like as you get older, the years go by faster?
Yeah.
My next thought was, wow, that's halfway to 80. And now I'm close to my deathbed. And I had this huge light bulb come on in my mind, which was, it does go by fast. Time is fleeting. And it is really about what we want to do with our time now. What are our priorities, and how do we use our time? What are we willing to tolerate? What are we not willing to tolerate? Who are the people we want in our life? And sometimes who are the people that we have to let go from our life, right? It was a huge realization.
And of course, we're doing this. I'm in a startup, which is fast-paced, but most of our listeners are in home care agencies, which is not a super cushy work-life balance friendly. I mean, every seat in the agency, marketers, owners who are doing the marketing and wearing a bunch of other hats. And so what would you say to somebody who feels like they're going to find out when their daughter's 15 that they have all these regrets and are going to have to find out how they forgive themselves? What would you say to somebody who's 5 or 8 years behind you in their career and in their kind of family life and stuff, so that they can avoid the potential future feelings of regret that they might be feeling right now?
First of all, I don't believe in regret, because regret's useless. We can't go back and change the past. But what I do believe in is self-forgiveness and forgiving other people. What you can do, it is a lot to balance, especially for the owner when they're just starting and they're having to market to, and they have a family. Some owners are still working another job while they're trying to get their agency going. But there are different measures you can put in place to optimize your use of time. So if you are the owner in your marketing, make sure that you divide your territory in sectors. Concentrate on a certain sector each day that you're going out there. The other thing is, make sure that you're focusing on the right types of accounts, the right people in the accounts, okay? But then here's another measure. So in our industry, everything seems to be an emergency. Everything's an emergency. And they say that when you're trying to really be productive, you should focus on one thing and then the other thing. Very difficult in home care. Here's something that's very, very true. Not everything is an emergency. So train your caregivers, train your internal staff. You can even train your referral sources. This concept of 911, 611, 311. If I'm in a meeting, let's say I'm the owner and I'm in a meeting with a wealth manager, and all of a sudden my phone is ringing and I see it's the office, I want to do everything I can not to have to step away from that highly valuable meeting, right? That's going to propel my business forward. So, but if my internal staff can send me a text message that says 911, then I do know that it is actually an emergency, and now I can excuse myself. But if they send just a 611, then I know I just have to get back to them by the end of the day. If it's a 311, I know that I can follow up with them the following day, right? So this is improving. It's these boundaries around your time. And what you can do is create a document. What constitutes a 911? Here are the things. What constitutes a 611? Here's the list of things. And the same thing for a 311. So it creates this discipline around what is an emergency, what's not. And it's also a communication method that's very, very efficient, because with the 911, 611, 311, then you're not having to type paragraphs of information or emails.
Yep. I think that's great. I've heard two other tools that have been helpful to me as I've worked with teams to kind of try and prioritize and triage incoming issues that all feel like they're hair on fire problems. And one of those is to make a matrix, and it's XY axis. And on one axis is urgency, and then the other one is importance. And so there's stuff in our business that is both urgent and important. Caregiver call outs, a fall that you've got to attend to as an operator. Those things are both important and urgent. There's stuff that's important but not urgent. Territory planning. There's stuff that's urgent and not important. And we've got to be able to validate the feeling behind it, but not chase the shiny thing that takes us away from all of this important stuff, strategic stuff, emergent stuff that happens in our businesses.
Right. We have to prioritize appropriately.
And then the other tool that I've liked is like, okay, what's the importance and what's the complexity? And what are the things that are really important and an easy win? Fairly quick to solve. We can buy something, we can build something pretty quick to solve those problems. And then what's the stuff that's super important, but like crazy complex? And we can say, okay, cool, by X date, we hope to have that resolved, but it's not going to be the thing we work on today because there's easier wins.
Exactly. Right. The prioritization. I think there's an EOS tool, matter of fact, that has a structure. I can't remember what it's called right now, but it structures out those certain things.
Great. Our next segment is one that's called Underrated, Overrated. And today, I want to ask you about something that you think is totally overrated in the industry. People value it way too highly, and it's not nearly as great as people say that it is.
I am finding that people are valuing too highly, before they do enough research, investing into CRMs that are home care specific CRMs. I'm not saying that there's not value in them, but I'm saying do your due diligence, include your team members as part of this evaluation process, because the last thing you want to do is invest all kinds of money monthly, and then there's a lack of adoption. Now, I know some in the audience are thinking, well, that's on the owner, right, or the marketer to make their people use it. Well, if you really want to increase the likelihood that they're going to use this software that you're investing in, include them in the discussions from the get-go, get their buy-in. Now, they still may be complaining about having to use another software. I understand that, but at least they feel heard. And so you're definitely increasing the likelihood. The other thing is substantial training. You can't implement any type of new software for your marketers and expect for them to automatically know how to use it. And what I've seen is there is some upfront training, but it is not intensive enough So where they feel comfortable in using it, okay? A 1 hour training with a lot of these software systems doesn't cut the bill, right? And so I would suggest, and maybe this is a suggestion to the software companies themselves, as part of your onboarding, schedule out maybe 1 hour once a week for your new clients to make sure that they're really retaining what you're telling them about how to use the software.
Yeah.
Because I do believe in the power of it, right? But I'm seeing a lot of agencies invest in certain tools that never end up getting used. And then they're paying that monthly bill every single month until they decide we're not going to use it anymore because nobody's using it. Try to find that out in the beginning.
I remember in a previous role making the decision to purchase a real estate specific CRM, and adoption was terrible. And we signed up for like a year for the discount of like 40 seats, and probably 8 people used it and they didn't like it. And that was, such a change management failure that we invested all these resources in software and figured that it would sell the value of itself to the people. And it didn't. You got to show people how to use it. Most salespeople don't like their CRM. They don't want to be tracked or managed or, judged on their activities. They want the results to speak for themselves. But, salesperson, speaking to myself here, you got to use the tool, but you've got to be trained on how to use the tool as well.
Trained and accountability. Exactly. Upfront training, but good, solid training. And then they have to be held accountable to using it. I know when we talked about overrated too, I don't want to leave this one out because it's important. It's where I see agencies making wrong decisions on hires. They are overvaluing, right? When somebody comes to them and says that they have X number of years of home care experience, they have all these different people in their network, right? That they're coming to the table with. My biggest suggestion to you is first look for work ethic. Do they have the work ethic? And when I say work ethic, I'm talking about the work ethic that was instilled into someone when they were a child, right? It is part of their identity to work hard. The second thing is a natural curiosity about them. And then the third is communication competency. Look for those things first. Now it's a perfect day if they do have a network and they're not lying to you about it. And if you want to gauge that, it's not just them listing off different referral source accounts, because it's not the brick and mortar building that refers. It's the people in the account. So who do they actually know? And then to further verify that, would that marketing candidate be open to you calling 2 or 3 of their referral sources to gauge whether or not they would actually follow them over, okay? If it's a marketer who has very, very deep, strong relationships, they are not going to be afraid for you to speak to their referral sources because they know they have the loyalty of those referral sources. So stop putting too much emphasis on number of years of experience and network and look for those other things.
Yeah. I have a follow-up question on communication competency. Let me tell you what, when I hear that, what my litmus test is, and if there's any salespeople out there who ever want to work with me, this is what you should do, is when somebody is asked a question, do they clarify what the person means by the question before answering the question, or do they launch right into the 3-minute spiel in answer to the question and inadvertently answer a question that wasn't asked? I've been on a lot of calls in my time when somebody misunderstands the question, and it's honest, they weren't clear enough. And they answer the question they think was asked rather than the real question. And I watch the prospect's face drain of life, and they know they're going to be listening to something totally irrelevant to everybody on the call for 3 minutes. And that's my soapbox about communication competency.
That's an amazing point, right? So what's an easy way to do that? If I'm hearing you correctly, I'm understanding that you want to know this, right? Or if I'm hearing your question correctly, right, it's the brief back.
Yep, exactly right. Do you have here's my litmus test for communication competency?
Number 1, I have no interest in ever owning a home care company. I just like to help them. I do not want to be an owner. But if I were hypothetically an owner and if I was hiring a marketer, the way that I would gauge communication competency is, of course, right, when I'm interviewing them, 1, phone interview. How do they present on the phone? And then, of course, if there's written communication, so their emails back, Are they thanking me for the next step? Are they following up in that professional manner? And how is the basics? How is their grammar? Are they speaking in complete sentences, right? But then when you're face to face, not only do they come across as articulate, but are they able to pick up on nonverbal communication cues? Are they good at this stop and go of conversation? Or are they the type of person where you are trying to clarify a question for them, but they just need to get out what they're trying to say, that they can't stop themselves and pause, right? So it's this, can they flow in conversation? And then to test the written communication competency, give them a case study. So here is a scenario that's typical to our industry. I would like you to evaluate this scenario and write me up, right? How you would handle this situation. So it's showing critical thinking, but also written communication aptitude.
That's great. I hope people were taking notes on that specifically, because that's really, really tactical. Okay, great. The next thing that we're going to talk about is, we talked about a big mistake that you'd made in your career, but what's a little mistake that you see owners, or in this case, marketers, making all the time, that if they quit, it'd make their lives or their businesses like 100 times better?
Okay, so this mistake would improve outcomes as in numbers, revenue, but it would also significantly reduce the overwhelm and the unneeded stress that people are feeling in this role. So it's that of focusing too much on the quantity of interactions with referral sources versus the quality of the interaction. Okay. You do not need 100 different referral sources. You could have half or even a quarter of that, but go really, really deep into those relationships and create such depth, one within the account with multiple people, but the depth of the relationship where they are going to refer to you no matter what, right? Because you are their trusted partner. So that's one thing. Focus on, I do not subscribe to you should have 75 impressions every week, because what I've found is that creates the marketer who's just trying to reach that metric, and they're running into accounts, dropping brochures, turning around and running out. That's not how you develop relationships, okay? So I'm okay with 40 quality face-to-face conversations, interactions per week, but we are learning something about them and sharing something about us and the agency, right? And then there are advancement steps to keep courting the relationship and leading towards that commitment, okay? The other mistake that I'm seeing a lot of is not having a diversification in the referral source portfolio from the beginning, or when you learn about the concept of a diversified referral source portfolio, you don't take action on it. It's like, oh no, we just want to make more progress with the healthcare accounts before we start adding trusted advisors, so legal financial referral sources. Well, you're not going to ignore the healthcare ecosystem. You need them, right, as part of your portfolio. But if you delay, you're still behind the curve. And it is completely possible to have relationships in the healthcare ecosystem and legal financial. I've done it. Gabrielle Pumpian, she and I work closely together. She'll tell you that she did it and wishes that she had started doing that sooner. But you need healthcare ecosystem, high volume of referral sources, right? Imminent need. There's this urgency behind it. Legal financial, low volume number per year, financially qualified, referred sooner, and pre-sold, because those professionals have an advisory level influence.
Yeah. And I would have to guess, because you've educated me a lot on what you do, but I'm still very much a novice. But I would guess the sales cycle, the process by which you get to know those trusted advisors and start to get referrals from them, is way longer than the healthcare ecosystem.
It can be. Or you could get lucky, right? So I've had some of my marketers who, in their second actual sit-down meeting with a financial planner, they've received referrals. But it all is depending on how you're approaching that. Are you telling stories? Are you talking in case studies to get them to think about their client base and who needs services? So to answer your question, sometimes I'm 6 months to a year with them, But the beauty with them, they're not as high frequency. You would never go and see an attorney or a wealth manager once a week. They're going to think you're weird, okay? So it doesn't involve as much time. And a lot of the nurturing of that relationship can be done via LinkedIn or seeing them at a networking group once a month. But these are referral sources that are not inundated by marketers in our industry. And they very, very much need a senior care professional as part of their advisory team. They don't know what we do. And they don't really want, they want to learn, but they don't want to do it. They're used to having other advisors. So
Yep.
You have to view yourself as though you're bolting yourself on to these law firms, wealth management firms, CPA practices as the elder care division to what they do.
So if I'm listening to this for the first time and I'm doing the high frequency, let's call it a little bit more, I don't know, transactional oriented kind of healthcare marketing, and I want to get involved with these kinds of more financial planners, estate attorneys, those types of individuals, what does a good speaking in customer stories or case studies sound like when you're talking to somebody in that seat?
Okay. I will share a situation that I had. This was several years ago. I had received a referral from a CPA, and it was one of his clients. This gentleman was on the younger side. He had a diagnosis of ALS. His wife on the younger side, right? They had two young daughters that were, young college students. Well, it's not that they didn't have money for services. They did, but it's not like they were super wealthy. They just hadn't had as long of a time to amass wealth. So the CPA and I were talking about the situation, and we needed to make sure that we could provide for this gentleman's needs, but also not leave his wife destitute upon his passing, his wife and his children. So we decided we needed to bring a financial planner into the mix. And so we discussed it, and we decided who we would introduce to the situation. That financial planner then asked me in the meeting, well, can you give me some projections? And at the time I was like, what do you mean projections? Well, how much is it going to cost now for 1 week, and for what's the cost for a month now? And then what will the cost be 6 months from now, right? Okay, well, when you have a plan of care, we're talking about hours. It's easy math, okay? Number of hours times the hourly rate. And it's a projection, so we know it's not set in stone. So all I did was take a spreadsheet and say, okay, here's the care plan we're starting with. Here's the associated weekly cost, monthly cost. In 90 days, right, here's what I'm thinking it will be, and here's what I'm thinking it will be in 6 months. And we also included the gentleman as part of this discussion. We were talking to the physician as part of this discussion. And so from that came the concept of cost of care projections, because the financial planner needed that information to do what she does as an advisor. So that's one situation.
I think that's great. And what a differentiated kind of conversation to have. And if I was going to put my marketer hat on and I was going to go talk to a financial planner, I might say something like, hey, when I talk to other financial planners, one of the things that frustrates them about working with home care agencies is we don't bring the projections on what is care likely to cost today on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, and what does that look like 6 or 9 months down the road as this person's condition progresses. And so that's one of the things that we do. And so one of the reasons people like to work with us, and you can even say, if it's relevant, so and so and so and so have worked with us, and create kind of some social proof. But to be able to say, here's the problem that we solve, not just for your client, which and everybody says they're going to do, but here's the problem we solve for you, so that you don't have to go and become an expert in home care and learn how to do cost projections on your own.
Exactly. Right. So my friend Sheldon that I've known for years, anything senior care related. That's the other thing with Legal Financial.
Yep.
Yes, your focus, your bread and butter is home care, but you very much need to be an overall senior care advisor and understand the continuum, because they just want to reach out to you with anything senior care related and know you're going to handle it and report back. And by the way, David, bravo. That was perfect. I have many agencies looking for great marketers.
Well, thank you.
I'm not going to recruit you away from anybody, I promise, but.
Yeah, that's we'll talk about that after we've finished recording. Just kidding, Victor. I'm not going anywhere. I think this is amazing. I've learned a lot. and I want to move to a segment now that I call Win of the Week, which is we've talked about a lot of things like childhood trauma and self-forgiveness and mistakes and those sorts of things. But I want to end on a high note. And so I'd love to hear from you about something that's happened lately in your business that you're really proud of.
Oh, what's happened lately in my business? All the days blur together, but that's because business is good. So for a couple of years, I kept being asked to launch a virtual academy. I did not want to dilute the value of the in-person. So I dragged my feet. And finally, I bit the bullet and said, okay, there is a way that I can still provide all the same content, the tools, the subject matter experts. And the way I do that is I take a 2-day in-person, I break it into four-hour sessions. And what I'm really excited about the virtual option is that it's making it more accessible to the masses to attend. And a big benefit I'm seeing about the virtual versus the in-person is that there's time to process the information in between those sessions, go execute, come back, right? So that's huge. I'm speaking at Nick Bonautonomous's event in September, so the Home Care Champions Experience. And then I'm speaking at the National Aging in Place Council, Age of Innovation in Florida, and that's in October. So, and of course, and I don't want to dismiss the fact, so the huge and the wins that mean the most to me in my business is when I'm receiving messages from my clients and we get to celebrate together about the 24/7 case they got, or that they really had their first great meeting with an estate and trust attorney. So those things are happening all the time.
That's great. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Where can people find you or find out about some of the education opportunities that you offer? What's the best way for people to take action on, the stuff that we talked about today?
The best way to reach me, my cell phone number is 858-222-9241. My email address is Sarah, Sarah, @seniorcaresales.com. And the website is www.seniorcaresales.com.
Wonderful. Well, we'll put all that in the show notes. And Sarah, thank you so much for coming on. Like I said, I don't know hardly anything about home care sales and marketing. We spend all our time on the recruiting, the referrals, the retention side of things, but loved our conversation today. And I think it's going to be really valuable for people who listen.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, David. I enjoyed it.
On behalf of the team here at Ava, thanks for listening to our show. We'll be back next week with another episode. So make sure you subscribe wherever you listen. If you have feedback on the show, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or send us an email to podcast@joinava.com. Thanks. And remember, the year may be 2024, but hindsight is always 2020.